So as I said last video, I'll most likely be playing all the Battlefield games in reverse order, not necessarily all at once as in one after the other. I'm sure I'll spread them out, though saying that, this video is all based on Battlefield 1, and as you may have seen, Battlefield 5 was my last upload, so I guess not, but in all seriousness, I will be checking out a different game in the next one, which isn't Battlefield. Now I started off with 2042 as my first impression of the franchise, so not a great decision, I know. I don't recommend starting off with that game, though I was aware of this before playing, as I said in the last video, as I'd heard some pretty negative things about why that game isn't near as good as the others, and 5 was definitely better, and I actually still recommend it now. I loved the gunplay and some of the war stories as well, though they could have been done a bit better. I mean, they definitely tried something different by focusing on lesser known stories of the time. The multiplayer maps were better than 2042, but still not amazing, I don't think. So it brings me on to Battlefield 1, which has been given a good amount of praise from fans, and some go as far as saying it's the last decent Battlefield game, which I can sort of see. From what I heard, this is due to areas like the actual multiplayer side, which has way more immersion to it in terms of the feeling of being at war. The visuals are amazing for an 8-year-old game, the maps are definitely better, as well as the campaign being pretty good as well, and overall just a very solid and realistic war game. Now I did wonder for the longest time before I checked out the franchise at all why it's called Battlefield 1, and the simple answer to that is it's because it's set in World War 1. Nothing to do with the order of the games, which would be a bit weird. The same with 2042 as well, which is set, funny enough, in the year 2042. I'd like to start with the campaign of the game, and I do tend to focus on a solo experience when I do these reviews, if it does include a story, which it does, and of course I will cover the multiplayer as well. Now just like 5, the campaign includes a series of war stories rather than your typical single player story. Like the earlier games 2, 3 and 4 do follow just one narrative rather than a selection of different stories. It seems now they want multiple short ones, which I actually don't mind, as long as they're good. In this game they actually are. I definitely prefer them to 5 for a number of reasons, and I'll go through each one. The war stories follow a different protagonist each time, if you don't know, all in a different area and time in World War 1. So Storm of Steel is just the intro and the prologue, just like My Country Calling in 5, and it also plays out in a similar way, so it involves several soldiers you play as, only for a very short amount of time, as when you're very low on health it will go into slow-mo, and then when you die in combat it seemingly moves over to the next soldier, with it showing the name and birth and death date when you die. It's very brief and just a quick introduction to the game to get you into the feeling, which it does so well at, just instant high action and all-out warfare, which just sets the tone of the game perfectly, like no better way. Such a great intro to it, and then at the end the final soldier doesn't actually die and it will end with a great cinematic. Really nothing bad to say about it because of how small and simple it is, but it does everything so well, like showing you the basics like in most intros, and yeah, just sets the presence so well. Now Through Mud and Blood is the first main mission where you play as Danny Edwards, a British soldier as you control the landship tank for the Black Bess crew. Now your character does lack a lot of experience, so they aren't familiar with this massive vehicle they have to control, and you follow orders from your crew even though they don't even fully trust you. You even have to get out and repair the tank a few times because it's on its last legs. The whole goal is to progress further upland and get past enemy lines towards Cambrai, with several outposts in the way which split up the traversing of the tank, which of course does help with the gameplay as you're not always moving forward. You'll have to stop a lot of times and fight a bunch of soldiers, all with their own tanks and field guns. It includes 4 missions, which is the most alongside the next war story, and you're always progressing forward and pushing through enemy territory, with some great immersion because of how high action it is, but also the cinematics as well. Now you do meet and interact with many characters just in this one war story alone, and without any, spoilers, you do lose some, and the cutscenes do display this quite well, with great voice acting and emotion from the actors, and visual design of the characters, which I found looked even better than games above this one. The next war story is Friends in High Places, which if you couldn't tell is all based on you being up in the air. You follow American pilot Clyde Blackburn as his goal is to control the Bristol, alongside his gunner Wilson, with a number of in-air combat missions. Now, due to it all being based around flying, there's only so much variety you can have, and the war story includes 4 missions, so if the majority of them are in the sky, about 3 of them are, then maybe it can get a bit repetitive. I didn't mind it as the missions are quite quick anyway, but there could have been a bit more variety or simply just less missions. I don't think they needed 4 for this particular one. The gameplay was still fun know, and although it took a bit of getting used to controlling the Bristol, the game does so well at showing you what to do without dragging it out. Like, you start by getting in close distance to another aircraft, like following it, and you have to stay that distance as you fly just to help with controlling. Now, I used keyboard and mouse, with the mouse controlling the direction of it for the most part. I'm sure I could have, changed the controls, but it wasn't too bad. The missions involve shooting out target balloons at the start, so some air ones and some on the ground, and then moving on to multiple aircrafts in a dogfight, and then shooting some out in quick time to stop them from bombing, blowing up other tanks on the ground as well, and it's all very seamless, so you're not on one area for a long time. It quickly switches to the next objective, so it's always moving forward. I found it quite fun, and I'm sure you can already tell that they're basically trying to involve every aspect of World War I with a designated vehicle or type of gameplay to each war story. So it's those classic type of missions, and you really are getting a piece of everything, which you should expect when going into the game, unlike what they tried with 5. So next war story is Avanti Savoia, where you play the role of Luca, an Italian soldier part of the Royal Italian Army, searching for his brother in the Italian Alps. And I actually really like the setting. It's all uphill and very mountainous as expected, with trenches built into the mountains, so as you're progressing it seems like there's always action everywhere with soldiers on every corner you turn. I must admit, before you're on the mountain, it's okay. I didn't love it just because it was kind of open and a lot of running. Just seemed like there wasn't an awful lot going on, but then it did get better as you moved upwards. Either way, this war story is only 2 missions, so quite a short one, and it felt like that even more so after coming off back-to-back 4-mission stories. Then there's The Runner, where you follow Frederick Bishop in the Australian Army, where you meet recruit soldier Jack Foster, who managed to get past military service by lying about his age. You watch this relationship build from start, and at first it seems like Bishop doesn't really like him or doesn't care, and then through the missions you do see him become closer, and the whole character development is great to watch. This was one of my favourites, I think. The gameplay missions are set in Gallipoli during the British landing. They are also good and sort of a bit of everything, but nothing crazy. A mix of close quarter and some open combat, with Bishop basically teaching him how to use a gun properly. But I definitely say the narrative is what makes this one so good, and seeing the progression of Bishop teaching him and then coming to an end was beautiful to follow. And then lastly we have Nothing Is Written. You play as female rebel Zara as you go on a mission to stop the Canavar, which is a fully armoured tank. You ambush it in the last mission, which isn't bad in terms of the gameplay, I don't think, as you have to be somewhat strategic with it. Like, you can't just sit on a gun until it's destroyed, as you can only really get 1 or 2 shots off if you're lucky before they destroy that gun with their missiles, meaning you're always moving from field gun to field gun, or planting and throwing multiple explosives on the train as it's fighting back with its guns, and as well as a bunch of soldiers getting in the way. The ones before, like the first stealth mission, isn't overly exciting, basically just stealing a book, and the AI are quite slow at spotting people, so it's not too difficult. I guess it could ruin the immersion for some people. So that's one stealth mission, and it's followed by another where you're tasked to send out 3 separate homing pigeons secretly, but it's not the end of the world if you don't do it stealthily, but it's fairly straightforward anyway. I didn't mind it. I guess it could have had a bit more to it, but the fact that there isn't that many stealthy missions in the game, I was fine with it. And overall I loved playing through the story, and because I've only played the latest 3 Battlefields, I can safely say that this one is my favourite out of the 3, but I can't even say that because 2042 doesn't have one. Let me know what you think of the campaign in the comments. The actual gameplay and gunplay of Battlefield 1 is still just as good as 5 in my opinion. I wouldn't say there's a drastic improvement or downgrade, which is a good thing, as 5's was great as well. Just so realistic and satisfying, which makes it so fun to use, as well as testing out different weapons to see how they vary. Obviously some are heavier than others, so there's a difference in that weight feeling there, but for the most part they all still have that smooth use to them. The responsiveness could be a bit better, I guess, and I heard this was a bigger issue at launch, which has been improved since, which is great. Apparently before they were less accurate and unresponsive because of their high levels of bloom they put into the guns, but now they've done some great improvements to the mechanics and the gunplay as a whole, which is why I said it's now probably as good as Battlefield 5. Not even just improvements, but new guns added and better customization. The maps of the game are better in design than later games, but they're still massive. Not necessarily open for all of them, but they are very large in scale. Not to say that there aren't any open ones though, there still are there, which makes sense. I mean, there's going to be a few. Not every map will be filled with buildings and trenches everywhere, and I've come to accept that now. The thing is, due to how well they made the atmosphere of this game and how intense most of the gameplay is, just because of the sheer amount of action, I don't think some maps not being perfect isn't a huge issue this time around. I always still get that immersion, you know? I love how almost every bit of environment is destructible, meaning materials are flying everywhere, with buildings exploding left, right and centre. It just seems like it's always intense. I mean, at some points it's legitimately scary because, you know, when you're hiding behind cover with a tank or aircraft obliterating your surroundings, it's pretty intense. And that also brings me on to the vehicles, which I wouldn't say are as present as other games like 2042, which I felt like you could always spawn in a new one, or there was just loads everywhere. I guess it makes sense because that was a more modern game, I suppose, but then the feeling of getting one isn't as exciting then. Whereas this game, it's great if you manage to use one, but also even go up against one. That's how fun it is. And that is where I end my review of Battlefield 1 in 2024, 8 years later, and I still recommend it for sure. It has a fairly active player base where you'll always manage to get into a game. I can't guarantee you can play any game mode with any filter on, but there will be always plenty of big lobbies to join for sure. Like Conquest, for example, which seems to be the most popular one. And of course it does include a server browser, which makes it a lot easier. And I love this game. I mean, it's definitely the most fun I've had on a Battlefield game, out of the ones I've played, of course. Now, it does seem like 1 is probably the best recent game in the franchise, if you can even call 8 years recent. But I mean, as in it's the best modern game, whereas I've heard very positive things about 3 and 4. But we must admit they are starting to show their age now, so it will be interesting to see how well they hold up when I get round to them. If you enjoyed this video, then let me know by tapping that like button below. And if you like single player and also multiplayer games, then that's what this channel is all about. I have many reviews on a variety of games, and there is a playlist of a series I've done in the description. If you'd like to support the channel by becoming a member at either level 1 or 2 to gain access to various perks, then tap the join button below. Thank you all for the support and watching until the very end. We also just hit 3,000 subscribers, which I really appreciate. I mean, we hit 2,000 back in February. To see it increase that much in that little time is crazy, so a big thank you to anyone that supports the channel in any way. And that was Battlefield 1 in 2024, and bye bye.